Hello and welcome to the Kim Iversen Show. So big news, the big news that we obviously must talk about. Donald Trump has been officially indicted and he's expected to be arrested, or actually they expect that he's going to surrender. He's going to surrender himself either tomorrow or next week. Originally, it was to be tomorrow that they were expecting, Friday, that they were expecting for him to be arrested or to surrender himself. But apparently the Secret Service asked for more time. And according to the New York Times, they said that his lawyer mentioned that he would be turning himself in on Tuesday. And when he surrenders, the process, the way that this is going to work is when he surrenders, he's going to be taken to a conference room. He's then, inside the station or wherever, the police station. Then in that conference room, he will be fingerprinted. There will be a mugshot taken. They will bring in an arraignment judge. He will then he'll be arraigned. He'll be let go on his own recognizance. So it's unclear at this point why he has been indicted. That is the big question at this point. As of right now, I think, unless they just release the indictment to the public, but at this point it has been it's still sealed, and we don't really know exactly what the charges are. Now, what we've been hearing over the last while has been that this is about hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. But other reports from CNN are that the indictment is actually over 34 counts relating to falsifying business records. So we don't know until these charges are unsealed, but it could be the business fraud. It could be Stormy Daniels, could be both. We're not really sure. We'll find out. But this is a historic moment. This will be the first time in history that a former U.S. president will be indicted on criminal charges. Trump has responded. He has responded with a statement. He says in a statement, this is political persecution and election interference at the highest levels. He says he calls out Democratic leadership, saying the Democrats have lied, cheated, and stolen in their obsession with trying to get Trump. But now they've done the unthinkable, indicting a completely innocent person in an act of blatant election interference. So he's obviously asserting that he is innocent. He's not wrong. They've definitely tried to go after him in every way, shape, or form. We've seen him impeached twice. We've seen them, attempt to go after, criminally everything, starting with he's tied to Russia somehow. And, this just kind of went on and on and on. Some other things he says in this statement. He says, never before in our nation's history has this been done. The Democrats have cheated countless times over the decades, including spying on my campaign, weaponizing our justice system to punish a political opponent who just happens to be the president of the United States. And by far, the leading Republican candidate for president. Has never happened before, ever. He also says, I believe this witch hunt will backfire massively on Joe Biden. The American people realize exactly what the radical left Democrats are doing here. Everyone can see it. So our movement and our party, united and strong, will first defeat Alvin Bragg, that's the DA. And then we will defeat Joe Biden. And we're going to throw every last one of these crooked Democrats out of office so we can make America great again. Lock her up, lock him up, lock them all up, honestly, at this point. Look, if he's guilty, it's true. No one is above the law. If you're guilty, you should go to jail, or you should suffer whatever the consequences are, or you should be you should pay the fines or whatever that might be. But if they're going to go after Trump, this is clearly political. There's no doubt about it. They're politically going after him. They've been going after him. If you could see, these are deep fakes, by the way. These are not real images that we're showing. These are AI generated, but they're kind of hilarious. So you can enjoy those. But these are not, I doubt they're going to actually, it's definitely not going to be like this in real life when he goes and turns himself in. It'll be very, I'm sure it's not going to happen in the dead of the night. I'm sure Trump is going to want sort of the fanfare of the whole, the optics of this, because it does serve him better politically. But there's no doubt that this is political persecution. There's no doubt about that. Donald Trump, if he committed some sort of business fraud, this guy has been in business for a long time, very, very wealthy. Many of us suspect that many wealthy business people have been committing some kind of crime behind the scenes to some level. If you went through basically any rich person's finances and businesses, you're going to find something that you could nail him with. I think that's what many of us suspect about everybody. Many of us suspect this about many of the politicians, that if you dig deep enough, you can find something. You can find something about any of them, because there's no way they have this much wealth and that they've been able to manage it absolutely perfectly by the book in every single possible way. So there's no doubt this is political persecution. But listen, if you're going to do this, if you're going to go down this road, then I want them all. I don't want just Trump. I want Hillary too. I want Joe Biden. I want Nancy Pelosi. I want all of them. I want you to take a fine-tooth comb to every single politician, and I want you to get all of them. I want the Bushes. I want everybody. If that's how it's going to be, take them all down, drain the swamp. That's fine with me, but do it fairly and do it to all of them. If we're going to have, a big Operation Car Wash type thing like they did in Brazil, where we're going to go after every single politician and say, but although even in that was very politically motivated, they only went after one side. You got to go after everybody. Do it fairly, do it justly. There we go. Lock her up. Take Hillary Clinton in too. It can't just be one-sided. It can't just be this one person. We all know this is absolutely, completely political. They've been doing this entire time, going after Trump. It's Hillary Clinton's revenge for him saying, lock her up, lock her up. It is kind of, hey, shoot, karma, right? Don't say lock her up and chant it at protests and expect that not to, expect that to fall on deaf ears. It didn't. Hillary Clinton heard it loud and clear, and now she's getting her sweet revenge. The woman's a Scorpio, after all. I had to throw that in there. Just saying. Now, obviously, this is being used, both sides extremely politically. I think to be expected. Democrats are celebrating, of course. They're boasting that justice is finally going to be served. Finally, we got him after all of these years. Trump is finally going to go to jail. He's not going to go to jail. But nonetheless, they're still going to say he's a crook. We finally got him. Now, Republicans, of course, are calling foul. They're speculating that this is political persecution. They're even saying that this is going to cinch Trump's Republican nomination for the presidential race in 2024, which I find very interesting. We're going to get into that. I want to get into the, why is this happening? And what really is going to be the consequences? Are we going to see riots in the streets? Is Trump going to end up being the presidential nominee for the Republican Party? Is that what the Democrats even wanted? But first, I want to show you some of the reactions. Ron DeSantis actually tweeted out his reaction. He said the weaponization of the legal system to advance a political agenda turns the rule of law on its head. It's un-American. The Soros-backed Manhattan district attorney has consistently bent the law to downgrade felonies and to excuse criminal misconduct, yet now he is stretching the law to target a political opponent. Florida will not assist in an extradition request given the questionable circumstances at issue with this Soros-backed Manhattan prosecutor and his political agenda. So there's a statement from potentially Trump's biggest rival. And again, I'm going to get to how I think maybe the Democrats really do want Trump to actually be the candidate, interestingly. Donald Trump Jr. also tweeted out, our corrupt elites aren't threatened by violent criminals on the streets because all of them have private security. They don't care if normal people are being terrorized, but they are threatened by Trump, which is why they're willing to turn us into a banana republic to stop him. So that's also, that's his statement as well. Now, what is going to happen? Will there be unrest and riots in the streets? There were some reports that the the NYPD said all units are on duty tomorrow because they're expecting civil unrest. They're expecting riots. They're expecting things to go crazy. So they're saying every single cop has got to be on duty tomorrow. They need absolutely everybody. And I'm sure that is probably going to be the case maybe in Washington, D.C., New York, and that'll probably go all the way through until he's arrested, the mugshot and all that stuff, which Democrats are going to be just salivating over that mugshot. But will there be unrest? Do I think there's going to be unrest or riots in the streets? Ultimately, Democrats would want nothing more than to see that, right? They want to see another January 6th type event. They want to see people get riled up. They want to see people commit crimes. They want to see what would be ultimately viewed as what they could paint as terrorists, domestic terrorists. See, we told you these conservatives are domestic terrorists. We told you so. Look at what they're doing. Look at how they're behaving. They want to see that. They want nothing more than that. All the more reason for conservatives to not do that, to not take to the streets, but instead protest in other ways. But ultimately, fundamentally, conservatives are law-abiding citizens. So it's part of the conservative way of being is the law, the rule of law. Even if the rule of law is ridiculous, conservatives will follow the rule of law. Unlike liberals that say, well, the law is flexible. This is sort of the difference in just the basic mentality of a conservative versus a liberal. A conservative has a mentality naturally of I uphold the law, I observe the law, no matter how ridiculous the law is. Liberals, on the other hand, say that law is ridiculous, break the law. We don't need that law. We can kind of bend the rules. We can bend things. This is why one group is very by the book constitutionalists, and the other group says it's a living document that needs to be interpreted differently depending on the circumstances and the times. So fundamentally, by nature, ingrained in their brain, I would say conservatives are very law-abiding citizens. So I would not expect to see riots in the streets, burning buildings. I'm not expecting any of this at all. We didn't see that when Trump, when Biden, when they announced that Biden won the election. We did not see riots in the streets. Of course, there was January 6th, but that was a one-time event. It was a very actually smaller event, actually. I mean, there were a lot of people there, but it was one place in the country. This didn't happen everywhere. We didn't see George Floyd-style Black Lives Matter protest over Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We just didn't see that. So I don't expect that. Although, like I said, Democrats would love nothing more. And if there's ever a time to utilize the big brother state, the surveillance state, to try to justify an expansion of it, to try to paint Americans as terrorists that they need to surveil, this would be the time to do it. So I'd be looking for those bad actors who are trying to rile people up. I'd be looking for those people for sure. This is an extremely authoritarian move by Democrats. This is going to turn a lot of people off. This is one of those moments where some people are saying this is not only sealing the Republican nomination for Donald Trump, but this is sealing the presidency for him as well. That there are going to be so many people disgusted by the authoritarian behavior of the Democratic Party that they will just shun the party. They will say, that's it, last straw. I didn't even like Trump. And many of us are in that camp. I'm one of those people. I didn't vote for Donald Trump ever. But this time, and I think a lot of people are feeling that way, that they just are so disgusted by the Democrats, their behavior, that they can't allow them to keep winning office, that they need to lose in order to be taught lessons, that they cannot continue to behave this way. But I actually think, in thinking more about this, that ultimately they knew this, right? This is why it's so weird. Everyone says, oh, well, they know this is going to seal the deal for Donald Trump. It's going to march him right back into the White House, certainly the Republican nomination. And so then one has to think, well, then why would Democrats do this? They hate Donald Trump. They keep trying to get Donald Trump. So why would they make this move that just solidifies his candidacy? Well, because ultimately, you know who they fear more? Ron DeSantis. They don't want Ron DeSantis to end up with that nomination because they know that they don't have the ammunition against Ron DeSantis like they have against Donald Trump, that a lot of those never Trump Republicans would vote for Ron DeSantis. They would bring them back into the Republican Party, and they fear that more than anything. So Ron DeSantis actually is a bigger foe to the Biden camp than Donald Trump is. With Donald Trump, they could say, oh, people just still didn't want this big orange buffoon in office, and they didn't vote for him. But with Ron DeSantis, that's going to be a harder case to make. And so ultimately, maybe they did this. They indicted Donald Trump, and now this is solidifying his candidacy as the Republican nominee because they ultimately would rather run Donald Trump against Joe Biden than Ron DeSantis against Joe Biden. Ultimately now, Ron DeSantis can't run. Ron DeSantis is now out. There's no way he can run against Donald Trump anymore in these circumstances. Ron DeSantis, at that point, would look like an establishment candidate. Nobody would trust him. He's done. He's toast. That campaign isn't going to happen. Only a fool at this point would run against Donald Trump. And Republicans know that, but more so, Democrats know that. They know that. They want this. They want this. They would rather see Donald Trump versus Biden because then they can ensure Biden wins one way or the other. And they could just write it off as people just didn't want a crook. People didn't want the orange buffoon back. People didn't want the civil unrest. They didn't want the terrorists that Donald Trump brings out. That's how they're going to paint this. So I actually think that this was a calculated political move by Democrats, that they were not being stupid in this and, wow, how, you guys are so dumb. And now look at what you've done. Now Donald Trump is going to, no, I think they actually want that. I think this is something that they're doing on purpose. So one big question I have, though, is if, let's say, Donald Trump actually ends up being convicted, and if that means he has to go to jail or prison, whatever the charges are and whatever the punishment is for the crime, will Secret Service have to go to jail or prison with him? It's a good question, because actually a former president is guaranteed Secret Service protection for the rest of their lives. And it doesn't have any caveats in there, like unless they go to jail, in which case they're subject to the prison guards, the same ones that guarded Epstein. There's no provision there. So poor Secret Service, if Donald Trump ends up in jail or prison and you're put on his detail, what is that like? That's what I would like to know. Would they put him in a regular old prison? Would they put him in regular old jail? Like, how is this going to work? What would they? How do you even deal with this? It's going to be something. So we'll be watching this story, of course, as it unfolds. We'll be, of course, following this. But this is just definitely, I'd say, a dark day in American history to see a former president indicted, which is obviously, I haven't seen the charges yet, so we'll see what happens. But clearly what looks to be very politically motivated, unfortunately. All right. Well, if the interest rates are getting you down, you're looking at your retirement and it just seems to be slipping through your fingertips, then you should be looking into diversifying your investments into gold. And Birch Gold is a great company to help you do that. So you could just give them a email or go to the website birchgold.com/Kim. and submit your information. A specialist will contact you and they'll walk you through the process of diversifying your investments into gold. So, look, you want to hedge your bets. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. We don't know what's going to happen with the dollar. There's a lot of countries switching off of it. We don't know if it's going to plummet, but gold has always remained very stable. And, a lot of these other currencies are being backed by gold. So it might be a good time to diversify and invest. And Birch Gold is a great company to help you do that. They can help you with either getting physical gold that you keep in your possession, or maybe you want to have that real gold and silver held for you in an IRA in precious metals. So that is something that you could do. And you could work with that specialist to figure out what is best for your particular situation. But all you've got to do is go to birchgold.com/Kim to receive your free info kit and find out more. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the Associated Press that if they were to lose Bakhmut, he'll be forced to compromise with Putin. He said, quote, "Our society will feel tired. Our society will push me to have to compromise with them." He said Putin will be able to sell this victory to the West, to his society, to China, to Iran, and it will be used as leverage to seek a ceasefire deal that would involve redrawing the map. This is pretty big news. First time Zelensky has said anything like this. So why is Bakhmut the pivotal point in this war? With us now is former UN weapons inspector and author of the new book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, Scott Ritter. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. And happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I made it. One more year. One more year. Let's talk about Bakhmut. Why is this? Tell us about Bakhmut. Why is it so strategically important? Where Zelensky would say, this is the end all be all. If we lose Bakhmut, that's it. How is this any different than like Mariupol, for example?
Well, Mariupol was a coastal city that fell relatively early in the war. It was a decisive battle, but not the decisive battle. It was a battle that defined the conflict for the establishment of a land bridge connecting Crimea with Russia proper. But when Ukraine lost Mariupol, they fell back on prepared defenses that are centered on what is known as the Bakhmut Soledar complex. These are two cities, sort of twin cities, um, known for their salt mines. Underneath the ground, there are very deep, well established salt mines that help provide overhead protection. You can store a lot of equipment, a lot of logistics, a lot of men, a lot of material uh, here. And this made it a natural sort of keystone to the Ukrainian defense. Uh, this has been a battle that's been fought since May. The Bakhmut Soledar struggle has been going on since May. It's been a slow, grinding war of attrition. And the reason why it's taken on such importance is the amount of military power that both sides have brought to bear into this conflict. This is a lot like the Battle of Stalingrad in World War II. Stalingrad wouldn't have been the battle that it was if the Germans had simply bypassed the city and moved on. Uh, but the and if the Soviets had decided we're not going to defend it to the death, we're just going to continue to withdraw. But because the Soviets dug in, the Germans committed, it became one of the decisive battles of the war. Bakhmut, right now, we have 80,000 Ukrainian soldiers committed to this fight. 80,000. And what Volodymyr Zelensky is saying is when they lose this battle, and Kim, they're going to lose this battle. They're losing it as we speak. They will lose 80,000 men. And when that happens, the Ukrainian army is gutted. There's nothing left. And they are a defeated army and a defeated nation. And Zelensky has long said, you've heard him say, we're going to dictate terms of surrender to the Russians. We're going to insist the Russians leave Crimea, leave the Donbass, leave Zaporizhia, leave Kherson. We're going to have a counterattack. There will be no counteroffensive. Why? Because the entire Ukrainian the major proportion of the Ukrainian offensive power is committed to the Bakhmut battle. They're all going to die. The equipment is going to be destroyed. And when that happens, Zelensky will have to surrender. And that's what he's saying. He's going to have to accept terms of surrender that forever redraw the map of Ukraine, that these four territories that Russia annexed back in September, plus Crimea, will forever be Russia. And there's a lot of other things that'll go on too, such as Zelensky's going to have to cede some constitutional issues dealing with denazification. His military will have to be gutted. All of the NATO equipment that we've been providing will have to be either destroyed, turned over to the Russians, or returned to NATO. This is a strategic defeat of Ukraine because Zelensky made Bakhmut the strategic battle of the war.
Why do you think he did that? Why would he put all of his eggs into this one basket?
Zelensky is not a general. Zelensky is a salesman.
But he
His
has
job,
generals, right? I mean, the generals would have told him maybe this isn't a good idea, spread him out.
the, apparently, the generals have told him this isn't a good idea. We need to do a proper distribution of our troops on the battlefield. We need to fight a more delaying action. We need to be willing to trade space for lives, to save lives, to preserve our strength so that they could carry out a potential counteroffensive that everybody's been talking about. But Zelensky's job um, is to keep the West interested in this war, keep the West providing him with assistance, not just military assistance, but remember, the entire Ukrainian economy is dependent upon foreign assistance, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars and euros pouring in. If the West believes that Ukraine is losing the conflict, and the perception of a Ukrainian defeat would be obvious if they continue to retreat, to withdraw, to trade space for time, to preserve manpower. The West would say, then why are we continuing to give you weapons? If we give you weapons, we want results. So Zelensky said, the result I want is a victory at Bakhmut, and he's poured everything into that. And if he loses, he will have lost face, the West will have lost confidence, and he will be compelled to basically agree to whatever terms the Russians put on the table.
This is just so odd to me. The entire rhetoric throughout this entire war has been, we're not stopping until we gain back Donbass and Crimea. We're going to keep pushing. The narrative from the Western nations has been, we're not going to stop arming you until we push Russia back. We can't afford to lose this war. It just seems to be a sudden about face to say, okay, well then let's just put everybody in one spot so that they could be slaughtered by the Russians in one place at the same time. And then what? And then when that happens, then we have to concede the war, redraw the map, and Russia wins, or Russia will be able to sell this as a win. This just seems like such a shift. I can't wrap my mind around it except to think that this entire time, I mean, what many of us have suspected is that Zelensky's really just a puppet of the West, that he's on orders from whatever Western nations want, that he's not really operating on the behalf of his or in the best interest of his country, or maybe even what he wants himself. He might be, who knows? Like, I've thought maybe he's feeling threatened. Maybe there's some Western leaders that say, do it or else. You're the guy that we have set up for this position. So now for him to suddenly shift, it makes me think the West is shifting, and the West is saying to Zelensky, it's over now. People are tired. Our populations aren't wanting to fund this anymore. We're shifting to China. We don't want to have to give any more resources to you. And so you have to end this somehow, some way, and Bakhmut's the way to do it. I mean, otherwise, this doesn't make sense to me.
Well, Kim, the West hasn't gotten this war right from the very beginning. Let me give you a quick example. The Russians have called this a special military operation. There are many people in the West that say you can't use that term because you're buying into Putin's language. It's an invasion, and they say that for political reasons. No, it was a special military operation. If this was an invasion, the war would already be over. Ukraine would be destroyed. Zelensky would be dead. That's what happens when you invade. A special military operation was designed to get Ukraine to the negotiating table. Russia never wanted this war. Russia didn't want this outcome. And when they were compelled to intervene militarily, they wanted the quickest possible resolution to this conflict, a negotiated settlement. And remember, on 1 April in Istanbul, Russia was ready to sign a peace treaty that would have allowed Ukraine to retain Zaporizhia, Kherson, their dignity, hundreds of thousands of lives, tens of millions of refugees. None of this would have happened, but the West stopped it because we thought Russia was weak. We misunderstood the Russian approach towards a negotiated settlement. And since that time, we've been trying to convince ourselves that Russia can't win this war, that Russia is weak. And we've failed to recognize the reality of Russia, which is they are a very powerful country. They mobilized in September, and they're on the verge of winning this war. They were always going to win this war. There was never going to be another outcome than this. The West has been deceiving itself and has been betraying Ukraine because we have been using Ukraine as a proxy. And as a result, 300 plus thousand Ukrainian soldiers are dead. By the time the Battle of Bakhmut is finished, it'll be closer to 400,000. By the time this war is over, it'll be closer to 500,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers. The blood isn't just on Zelensky's hands, it's on every Western leader who pressured him to keep this war going.
Why don't you think he just surrenders now rather than lose all of these 80,000 troops in Bakhmut? I mean, why sacrifice their lives if you know the outcome already?
Because he has deceived himself and he has been deceived by the West for so long. I think at the end of the day, it's like a drowning person in the ocean treading water. Why do you continue to tread water when there's no rescue vessel in sight? Because you're hoping if you could just hold out a little bit longer, a miracle will occur. There is no miracle coming for Ukraine. That's the tragedy. But Zelensky is going to hold out for a miracle, hoping the West changes its mind, provides him with the aircraft he claims he needs, provides him with more modern tanks, provides him with everything that will save him. The West isn't going to do it. The West is exhausted. The West is out of money. The West is out of materiel. And the West is just frankly done with this war.
One thing Zelensky also said to the Associated Press is if he will feel some blood, smell that we are weak, so he's talking about Putin, if he will feel some blood, smell that we are weak, he will push, push, push. This has kind of been the narrative, I think, from the West the entire time, that we must stop Russia because if we don't stop Russia here, they're going to keep on expanding, that Putin has a desire to reunite the USSR, to reinvigorate it. I mean, is there any truth to that? Do you think that there's any possibility that even if Ukraine does say, okay, fine, we surrender, we're going to give you the land, you can have the areas that you've already occupied, that you've annexed essentially during this war. Is there a possibility that Russia continues forward at some point?
You're familiar with Ray McGovern, the former CIA officer who's been outspoken on this issue. A very good intelligence officer and a mentor of mine. He's taught me a lot of things. And one of the things he taught me about dealing with the Soviet Union and Russia is to listen what the Russian leaders say. They're not Western political leaders. They don't habitually lie. When they speak in public, they tend to say what they mean, and they mean what they say. Vladimir Putin addressed the Russian people on February 21st of this year. At that time, he said the goal and objective of the conflict in Ukraine was to improve the economic and social life of the Russian citizens who lived in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the Donbass, the four territories. He made no mention of further territorial acquisition or ambition. He simply wants to bring peace to the Russian people. That's what his objective has always been, and that's what it will continue to be. It's a lie to say that Vladimir Putin and Russia is seeking to flex their muscles. They didn't start this war. This war was thrust upon them. They are going to finish this war, but when they finish this war, they will be satisfied with bringing a higher quality of life to all Russian citizens, including the newly minted citizens of territory. Ukraine will not be under threat if Ukraine promises not to threaten Russia. Remember, it was Ukraine that decided they wanted to join NATO. It was Ukraine that allowed NATO to rebuild their army to threaten the Donbass to kill Russians. It was Ukraine that shelled Russian civilians in the Donbass, killing hundreds of children, thousands of civilians. Russia sought peace before this war. They sought peace during this war, and they're seeking peace now, but it will be peace on their terms. There is no intention on the part of Russia to do anything that Zelensky or anybody else has said. This is part of the Zelensky tactic of instilling fear in the West so that they continue to support his conflict against Russia in Ukraine. It's a failed theory, a failed strategy, because the West no longer believes that Ukraine can prevail in this conflict.
So one of the non-negotiables, do you think, will be that Ukraine has to completely, and Putin has mentioned this, demilitarize by getting rid of all of NATO weapons from Ukraine, pushing them all the way out of the nation, and halting any sort of discussion about Ukraine joining NATO? Is that something that is definitely in the cards, or will they just say, okay, we'll just stop, we'll annex this land, and and that's it?
Well, they've already annexed the land under the Russian Constitution. The Russian Constitution has been amended to recognize these territories as part of Russia. That will never change, ever. And the reason why I say that is Russia is a nuclear power, and its nuclear weapons will be used to preserve the integrity of Russia. And it doesn't matter what the West thinks. If the West thinks they're going to get Crimea back, understand that if they succeeded in that, it would be a thermonuclear war that would end all life on planet Earth. So it's ludicrous for the West of talking about reclaiming territories. But that's all Russia wants, are the Russian territories. There will be demilitarization. Demilitarization will be the denatofying of the Ukrainian military. All the billions of dollars of equipment that we've provided will either be surrendered to Russia, will be destroyed by the Ukrainians, or removed. That is a prerequisite. It's not that talk about NATO will be put on hold. It will never happen. Ukraine will commit in writing that they will never be a member of NATO. That requires a constitutional change. Denazification is another demand. It will require Ukraine to have constitutional amendments that make the worship of Stepan Bandera, this odious neo-Nazi figure from history, illegal. They will outlaw Banderism just like Germany outlawed Adolf Hitler and Nazi ideology. That will be denazification. The Ukrainian military will also be compelled to withdraw a distance of around 100, 150 kilometers away from the Russian border, creating a demilitarized zone, because Russia will never again give Ukraine the opportunity to fire an artillery shell against a Russian civilian target on Russian territory. These will be the demands, and if Zelensky doesn't agree to these demands, then Russia will destroy Ukraine. That's just a given.
So I understand that a lot of this argument for the war has been because of NATO going right up to Russia's borders, but NATO is already on Russia's borders with Estonia and Latvia. And if Finland, which is on its way to joining NATO, joins NATO, what is the argument then when you've still got a border between Russia and these NATO nations? And even, even if they've already annexed this land in Ukraine, so that is now effectively Russia. On the other side of that line is still Ukraine, right? I mean, you still have Ukraine, and so what? How do we then? What would be the fate then? I would say of Finland and Latvia and Estonia, if the goal is to denato the border, too late. I mean, there's the NATO's already there.
No, that's true. First of all, there's a difference between Finland and Ukraine. Ukraine is a Slavic nation with a deep history, a cultural, religious, ethnic, language with Russia. So, the Russians feel that Ukraine is an extension of Russia, even if Ukraine is going to be an independent sovereign state. Um, the fact of the matter is, millions of Ukrainians live in Russia. Millions of Ukrainian families are dual Russian-Ukrainian families. There's a linkage there that the West doesn't understand why Ukraine is so
Mhm.
important. Finland made a fatal error. Russia's not going to invade Finland, but now Finland has to deal with the fact that one of the consequences of joining NATO is that Russia is building a 70,000 man corps that's going to be stationed on the Finnish border, threatening Karelia, threatening Helsinki. Welcome to the club, Finland. Not only that, every Finnish city now is targeted by Russian nuclear weapons. Welcome to the club, Finland. And if Finland seeks to put NATO infrastructure on its borders, then Russia will double the ante. Finland went from being a prosperous neutral country to a nation that now has been compelled to spend billions of dollars on a defense that they didn't need to have because Russia never posed a threat to them. That's the reality. The Baltic states, they've joined NATO. Now, the other thing is they are all protected under Article 5. So Russia's not going to attack them because an attack against one is an attack against all. But they're also all condemned to death if NATO ever engages in a war with Russia because now they're part of the NATO target. It
Mhm.
was foolish on the part of Finland, and I can guarantee you within a span of less than 5 years, they will regret forever making this decision.
Yeah, but then that exact same, that exact same logic would make that's why Ukraine is saying, well, we want to join NATO. Because then Russia would have that same feeling toward Ukraine that's in NATO as they do towards Estonia or Latvia, right? So
Yes,
it
but
kind of, yeah.
Ukraine is not Finland. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And if you take a look at the way Ukraine was created, it was literally an artificial state created by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in pursuit of a nationality policy that was as artificial as the day is long. Every Russian knows the truth that historically Ukraine is part of Greater Russia, and Russia will never allow Ukraine to be stripped away from its sphere of influence and transferred to the
Yeah.
West. Finland at one time was part of the Russian Empire, but from the Soviet experience, Finland was an independent nation, and so there's not that feeling of cultural betrayal, ethnic betrayal. But no, there's a huge difference between Ukraine and Finland, and people who have studied Russia understand exactly why Russia will never allow Ukraine to be part of NATO.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that Zelensky's making these comments. I mean, we might just be seeing the end of this conflict pretty shortly if what he's saying is accurate. If they do feel like it's time to go to the table over Bakhmut, that very interesting. So many of us wondered when this would end, and we might just actually be seeing it. Scott, tell us about your book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. This just came out a few months ago. What is this about?
Well, it's about the implementation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. That's the landmark arms control agreement that was signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987. Um, I happened to be one of the first inspectors assigned to the INF Treaty, and I actually was one of the first inspectors on the ground in the Soviet Union when the treaty implementation phase began. It tells the story of how we built from nothing a multi-million dollar monitoring facility outside of a Soviet ballistic missile factory and the implementation that went there. It talks about how we broke down the walls of fear and hatred and actually started working together as colleagues and friends with our Soviet counterparts to make the world a safer place. I call it not just a work of history, but a template of hope. Because today, when we take a look at the current relationships between the United States and Russia, they're just as bad as they were in the 1980s. And yet we found a way in the 1980s through the implementation of meaningful arms control to reduce tensions and make the world a safer place and improve relations. And I believe that's the key for moving forward today with Russia: arms control, meaningful arms control, real arms control.
Scott, thank you so much for your insight, and thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yesterday, Jamal Bowman and Thomas Massie had an exchange of words on Capitol Hill over gun control laws. Take a look.
Ask them, and then go to the Senate, ask the same questions. They're cowards. They're all cowards. They won't do anything to save the lives of our children at all. Cowards. Pressure them. Force them to respond to the question, why the hell won't you do anything to save America's children? And let them explain that all the way up until election day on 2024. Let them explain it all the way up to election day on 2024. They're freaking cowards. They're gutless. They're not here. I'm talking about gun violence.
You know, there's never been
I'm talking about gun
in
violence.
a school that allows teachers to carry.
Carry guns? You think more guns lead to more death? More guns lead to more death. Look at the data. You're not looking at any data. You're carrying the water for the gun lobby. Look at the data. More guns lead to more deaths. Good states that have open carry laws have more death. States that have open carry laws have more death. Are you listening to what I'm saying? Calm down. Children are dying. 9-year-old children. The solution is not arming teachers. Have you ever worked in a school? 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 It's a yes or no question. Have you ever worked in a school? You will not answer my question. Don't stop and talk to me. Okay, I'll bring it down a notch.
Okay, so what is the solution when it comes to gun control? With us now is Benny Johnson, host of The Benny Show. Benny, welcome. This is, look, I think this is a tough conversation to have. It's a very heated conversation. Jamal Bowman shows how heated he gets in this. It does seem to get heated with everybody. And we're not getting, I don't think we're having sensible conversation. That's my take on it.
I mean, it was nearly as heated as you asking Alan Dershowitz how Jeffrey Epstein died the other day. And you saw someone get a very hot under the collar there. My question about this current moment here is, as it pertains to hormone blockers, is Jamal Bowman on hormone blockers? Because there is not an ounce of testosterone in that man. There's not an ounce of the stoic man. You do not want representatives inside of your law passing and law enforcing bodies to be hysterical, feline, emotionally driven, post-menopausal sociopaths like that. I mean, that is an embarrassment. Now, a couple of things here. One, this isn't the victimization Olympics, okay? The person who's the most victimized and the loudest, and the person who yells and genuflects the most, you see this with the AOC a lot, right? The theater kids have taken over Congress. That's exactly what's going on here. The sad, weird, mopey theater kids think that if they're loud and if they gyrate enough, that will mean change. That's a horrible way to comport yourself in Congress. And actually, based on the rules of Congress, because I've actually worked in Congress for about a decade, you are supposed to comport yourself with dignity at all times, inside and outside of Congress. You are supposed to treat other members of Congress with dignity and never touch another member of Congress. So when you see Jamal Bowman there grabbing and pointing and stabbing and yelling at Thomas Massie, who's trying to just engage in a conversation with him and give him some data, what you're actually watching is somebody who's breaking every rule of Congress. He should be stripped of his committees, and he should get a timeout. You know, he should get a dunce hat and have to sit in the corner, Kevin McCarthy, and maybe draw on a chalkboard for a while, because this is a total and complete embarrassment. I'll say this: that's not how a man behaves. All right, just straight up, that's not how a man behaves. Stop acting like a teenager at like a cheering competition. It's an embarrassment. Jamal Bowman should be embarrassed.
I mean, I get that what he's trying to do is he's trying to show the anger that a lot of people in America are feeling over children being shot dead in their schools. You know, children used to have to just worry about forgetting their school lunch, and now they're having to worry about being shot at in the classroom, and that is definitely something that is very angering to a lot of parents. And I think he was just showcasing that. I agree that it was over the line. It was way too much. Thomas Massey was very calm. Thomas Massey usually is. You know, he's a very calm, collected guy, and he always focuses on data. And I really appreciate that about Thomas Massey. But parents are freaked out. I think a lot of people are really freaked out. And so I think what's missing now is the conversation of what do we do about all of these mass shootings that are happening in this country? What is the answer to that? And it seems like both sides can't come to, everybody seems to be very extreme in the viewpoint and very emotional about it, right? You see Jamal Bowman getting very emotional, but you also see people that are very, very fierce on the Second Amendment getting very emotional about don't you dare take my guns. So what do we do? What's your perspective? As I see the guns in the background, just so you know.
Right. That's because I'm a parent, right? So
Yeah.
I own firearms because I'm a parent. So let me make a statement right now that won't be popular, and I hope people don't take it out of context. But if you do, whatever. You know, I live and work on the internet. That's just the way it works. Here's the deal. I would melt down as a happy and proud gun owner who lives inside of the gunshine state, Florida. I would happily melt down. I would be the first, actually. I'll throw my guns into the lava first. I will personally decommission and melt down every firearm I own. If Jamal Bowman and anyone from his side can explain to me how that would make America safer. If you could explain to me how that would keep my or any other child alive in school, then I will do it. I will be the first in line, and I will happily, you could film me doing it. But here's the thing. When you take away guns from legal, moral, sane individuals who want to protect their families, all that does is leave weapons for sociopaths who are deranged and mentally ill to go and hurt me, and then I cannot meet force with force, right? And so that's what actually people like Jamal Bowman are in favor of as it pertains to gun-free zones at schools, because that's what this is about. Thomas Massey is about to introduce a bill to take away the gun-free zone status of schools, public schools in America, which was an imbecilic law passed by an imbecilic president, George H.W. Bush, in 1990. This was stupid. What this does would made schools soft targets. And so what that's told any shooter is that there won't be any guns here. And now we know for a fact, based on the Nashville PD, that the trans terrorist shooter in Nashville considered shooting up different schools, but then found out that they had armed resource officers. This shooter actually meticulously went to the soft target where they knew they would not be met with force and they could do the most amount of damage. And so what Thomas Massey is doing is saying, no, these people should be met with force.
So he's wanting to introduce a bill that says that there would be armed resource officers, or potentially even some teachers maybe would be armed, that we wouldn't be eliminating guns at all. You know, right now, the bill is saying no guns at all in certain schools, and he's saying, no, we need to reintroduce to where guns could be in the schools by certain people. Not that the kids would bring the guns in, but that resource officers and teachers would maybe be armed. Yeah, and that, look, it's part of the debate. It's certainly true that we now know from this manifesto that I don't think it's been released yet, but I think they're talking about releasing it. But the manifesto showing that the shooter was looking at 2 other public schools, but those public schools were actually armed, and said that there would just be too much security, too difficult, and so targeted this Christian school instead.
So, Kim, I love your show, and I hope that you get Jamal Bowman on the show. I hope that this interview doesn't stop you, prevent you from getting Jamal. Jamal,
I don't know if he's going on no matter what.
I'm speaking as myself here, okay?
Yes.
I'm speaking as myself. But you should ask Jamal if he's ever on your program. Why don't you get rid of your private security? How about that? Because you are guarded by essentially an army of people with fully automatic weapons, actually, at the Capitol, depending on where you're stationed. I know plenty of snipers who work at the Capitol for Capitol PD. I know the kind of arsenal that the Capitol PD holds. Have you ever seen these guys teched out when there is a threat on the Capitol? These guys are paramilitary in their force capacity. They're protecting who? Jamal Bowman. Every single step that Jamal Bowman takes is guarded by somebody with a very dangerous, very scary looking gun. So why doesn't Jamal Bowman be an example for all the rest of us and demand that the Capitol PD be disarmed. Why don't
Well, we
you
would
go
hope.
first, Jamal?
Right, and I completely understand. Right, yeah, because they're all very guarded, and they want to be, and they want even more security. But at the same time, obviously, lawmakers are more targeted. We would hope that our children are not actually targets. And so, the argument of we're going to amp up security, we're going to put in metal detectors and arm the schools. I mean, it just seems like a look, if that's what has to be done in order to protect children, I'm all for that. But at the same time, don't you think it's a little sad that we have to go in that direction in order to protect the children?
I think it's very sad, obviously. And why is it so sad? Because America, as a nation, has always had more guns than people. I shall repeat myself. America has always had more guns than people. That is why the Second Amendment exists. So why is this brand new phenomenon, which is new, just 40 years old, really, the phenomenon of the mass shooting or the school shooting? Why? Why hasn't that been something that's happened throughout the entire 250-year history of America, multiple centuries? I think we need to start asking those questions. The answer to it is a spiritual question. The answer to it is a disintegration and atomization of the things that actually make us sane as people. Your local church, your local community, a mother, a father, having a family connection, things that ground you and give you purpose in life. Having your city be profitable and not having all your jobs shift off to some other country. These kind of things give people sanity. And I think that we are looking at a mental health crisis in this country that masquerades, but is actually a spiritual crisis in this country. And I think that's really where your answer lies. It's not the weapon,
Yeah.
because people can drive cars and do dangerous things with cars, bricks, sticks, and rocks. It's right here is the real issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. There have been studies that have been done, that just look at data, and they're not trying to be political. They're not looking at one narrative or the other. They're just looking at the data. And they have found, both sides tend to be correct on this, but both sides are kind of screaming at each other. And that is, these shooters have a couple of things in common. One is that they hate something. Usually there's hatred. And usually when we see a shooter shooting up a mosque or a synagogue or, a nightclub, like Pulse nightclub, the narrative comes out quickly from the left saying, see, these people are, bigots. They're far right bigots that, this is who they are. They found that this is true with these shooters, but it's not that they're bigots. It's that there's other shooters that shoot up schools because they were bullied. There's people that shoot up their workplaces because they're angry at their job. They have hatred, but the hatred is directed somewhere. It's not because they're bigots or, these white far right, extremists. They also find that the majority of them are suicidal. I think that's really interesting, that the vast majority of these mass shooters are suicidal. And lastly, then they do have access to firearms on top of this hatred and being suicidal. So it does seem that there is this mixture going on, that maybe there is some limiting of some firearms that certain people shouldn't have. And maybe there should be some controls on that. And at the same time, then also focusing on mental health and ensuring that people aren't going down the path of being so hateful or being, which that stems often from having a lack of something, feeling lacking in some way, whether it be economically or feeling beat down in some way, right? So they take it out on somebody, whoever that might be, and focusing on the mental health of people who are suicidal. Is there a way for all of us to kind of come together in this conversation, do you think? Or do you think it's just it's not about the guns at all, it's just 100% about mental health?
Well, I think that people who are on antipsychotics or are on like dangerous hormone therapies or untreated or untested therapies should probably not have access to a firearm. In fact, as somebody who's purchased many firearms, you have to go through a very, very detailed background check. Now, this is one of the greatest pernicious lies of the left. There's no background checks. Actually, there's a massive background check. And I have been able to purchase a single firearm in my life without the FBI allowing me to. I have to tell them many, many personal details about my life. And if I lied on that form, if I dared, then I'd be in prison. 15 years is the maximum prison penalty for lying to the federal government on your background check. And that background check asks you about mental health. It asks you about antipsychotics. It asks you about drug abuse. If you are on those things or do those things, like Hunter Biden, for instance, and you illegally acquire a gun, then you should be in prison. If Joe Biden wants to actually make a really great case to the American people that dangerous people shouldn't have firearms, he should put his son in jail, actually, because his son was a crack user when he purchased a firearm and lied on his federal NICS form. But to your greater point, I think that there's a lot of rational Americans like myself who, if you could show me a plan that would save kids in school, that
Yeah.
wouldn't just give the murderers and the psychopaths all the weapons and the ability to come after my children, well, then I'd be perfectly rational. I'd be perfectly willing to hear that, Kim. And more importantly, Kim, I would be the first to melt down my guns if you could show me that that would save all children in all schools.
Yeah.
But you're gonna have to present something because that isn't the case right now. What happens is they want to disarm law-abiding gun owners, and they want to put guns into the hands of criminals and people who don't abide by the laws. Gun-free zone, right? That doesn't stop any school shooting. In fact, that encourages school shootings because the criminals don't abide by the laws. That's the purpose of a criminal, right? That's the point.
Right.
And so this is nobody has been able to show that to me because nobody has been rational here. And so
Yeah.
you need to bring common sense reforms to the table. And the first common sense reform is to get rid of the soft target schools.
So rearm them. That's what you think is the best solution potentially for this.
I'm not sure they were ever armed, but I think that you need to meet force with force and moment with moment. And right now we're facing a mental health and spiritual crisis in this country. And these sick individuals, these blackened, demonic individuals target children because that's what demons do. That's what Satan wants. And so they target children. And so, yes, they should be met with equal and greater force when they try and do that.
Yeah.
Nashville would have never
shame.
happened if there was an armed resource. If there was an armed resource officer in the school, Nashville would have never happened.
It's interesting that the Christian school, you would think that they would be the ones that were armed compared to the public schools in Nashville.
Right.
But
Strange.
yeah, but that wasn't the case. And so a really, really tragic, terrible thing happened that day. Benny, you're wonderful. Your show is a lot of fun and great information there. Thank you so much for being on. Definitely follow you. We don't agree on everything, but that's okay. We don't have to.
Hey,
that's what makes
fun.
America great is we're supposed to be able to have various conversations with various people, hear different perspectives, right? So-
Not one time did you scream or yell at me or get in my face or point your finger in my face or ask me who killed Jeffrey Epstein, which is very disappointing for me.
Well, that's why we have to end the conversation now before I get going. You know, you just hit me. I'm just at my limit now, Benny. I'm at my limit. I'm about to go Jamal Bowman on you. You just wait. All right, Benny. Thank you so much, Benny Johnson, host of the Benny Show. Where can people find your show?
Yeah, you can find our podcast, The Benny Show, on all podcast apps. And then you can find me at Benny Johnson, verified on every social media platform you can imagine, except for TikTok, because I don't like communism.
Are you going to stay verified on Twitter? Because I think they're ripping that away, you know.
Oh, yeah, we're going to pay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're going to do it. We're going to pay.
We're gonna pay.
I know. I'm thinking I'm going to have to do the same thing. I mean, you just don't want somebody pretending to be you and go. I mean, that's like. All right, Benny, thank you so much.
What's another billion or trillion for Elon? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kim.
Well, yesterday Well, if you owe back taxes or have unfiled returns, don't be embarrassed. This really can happen to anyone. The gig economy, you know, it's just difficult to kind of keep up with things and stay on top of things. And it's difficult. So a lot of people are behind on taxes. There's really nothing to be ashamed of. And now we've got the Biden administration hiring 80,000 more IRS workers to go after the gig economy workers, the people who have been having a tough time getting all those taxes ready. Well, don't deal with the IRS on your own. If you're feeling drowned, you're drowning in all of this, the IRS is coming after you. Tax Network USA is a nationwide tax resolution firm. They can help you out. They'll help protect your rights. They're going to help you settle your back taxes. In some cases, they can even zero out your balance so you don't owe anything to the IRS. They're experts in all of the IRS programs, and they understand tax law so that you don't have to. Over the last 14 years, Tax Network USA has saved over $1 billion in back taxes for their clients. They can even help you file your yearly return to protect you from audits. So whether you owe a few $1,000s or maybe even a few $1 million, they can help you out. Even if you haven't filed in years, they can help you. Even if you have a payment arrangement already with the IRS, they can help you. Just visit taxnetworkusa.com/Kim to find out more. Well, yesterday, the Senate voted to end the COVID-19 national emergency. Finally, believe it or not, 23 senators actually voted against it. Democrats, of course, that included Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders. Bernie even still shows up wearing a mask, Kirsten Gillibrand, a bunch of hypochondriacs, apparently. The measure passed the House with all but 11 Democrats voting against it. So most Democrats still said, no, we are in a COVID emergency. We got to keep this going. But 11 Democrats, I guess the only ones that actually have some sense to them, were saying, come on, it's over. I mean, even Joe Biden said that the emergency was over last year, and they're just now getting around to voting on this. They actually attempted to vote on this before. It was brought up before, but it didn't pass. This is back when Democrats controlled the House. It didn't go anywhere. But now with the Republicans controlling the House, they did the vote. It passed. It went to the Senate, even though the Senate is split. Enough Democrats, about half of them, a little more than half of them, decided, yeah, it is time to end the COVID-19 emergency. And so they passed it. So now Joe Biden has to sign it. Apparently he's mad about it. He doesn't really want to do it. He's saying, oh, I guess if I have to sign it, I will, which is really odd because the emergency was set to end anyway on May 11th. So this just speeds it up by just a few weeks. It's not even a drastic shift in when the emergency ends. But nonetheless, Joe Biden is apparently a bit curmudgeonly about it, but he will sign it according to inside sources, whatever that means. What's interesting about this, so what does this mean, ending the COVID-19 pandemic? This means the emergency. This means people should be able to travel into the country unvaccinated. So all of those Europeans, Americans can go over to Europe, fine, but unvaccinated Europeans have not been able to travel into the United States. This is, Novak Djokovic has not been able to come play tennis in the United States. So this should end that. This also would end free COVID testing, things like that the government set up, and also maybe even telemedicine. So that was something that actually I liked. I actually liked the telemedicine thing, the whole aspect of that during the pandemic. But apparently that was something that was the government was funding part of that. And so you might be limited on your access to telemedicine when the COVID-19 emergency ends. But otherwise, I think many of us aren't going to really notice a big difference because we've already, we ended the COVID emergency a long time ago for many of us. We've been living normally for a while now. And so this just makes it official. 3 years in that COVID-19 emergency with the government, 3 years. In more COVID news, the WHO came out with updated vaccine guidelines. They no longer recommend the vaccines for kids and teens. They actually said that it's because of high immunity levels due to vaccine and infection, which right there, they're admitting to natural immunity. They're saying, well, the kids don't need it anymore, rather than say, because the vaccine actually causes maybe more harm than good to kids, that it's really not effective. What's the point of giving it to a kid? They're still getting COVID anyway. They're not at risk of death. So what's the point? Rather than say all that, they instead have to admit the lesser of all the evils. And to them, that was admitting natural immunity. That was something they also didn't want to admit. But now they're admitting that because they're putting out there on the website that, well, this is because of natural high immunity levels in those populations due to vaccine and infection. They also changed their methods by grouping people now according to risk levels. This is also kind of a new development because remember, it was no, everybody's the same. Everybody needs to be treated the same. You've got people out there like the Great Barrington Declaration saying maybe there's different high-risk groups and we should protect the high-risk groups but let everybody else live normally. And they said, no, we're going to treat everybody the exact same, even though the average age of death with COVID is 83 years old. We know it affects older people over the age of 65 the most, but no, everybody's the same. Well, now, 3 years later, they're finally coming out saying, we're going to group people according to the risk levels. And they have new vaccine recommendations based on the risk level. So if you're high, medium, or low, you're going to have a different vaccine recommendation. High, they recommend you take all the shots, you take all the boosters, you take everything that they keep rolling out for you. Medium, they say they actually now recommend just the primary series plus one booster. And the low group, which is the kids and the teens, they just say, do your own cost benefit analysis. So quite the updates. But again, 3 years too late on this. Should have given these guidelines from the very beginning. And, especially when the vaccines came rolling out, we knew, and the data was clearer and clearer. They should have updated those guidelines when that data came out. But of course they did not. Now they're doing it when nobody's really interested in the vaccine anymore. Everybody's moved on with their lives. Everybody's acting like the emergency's over. People are just done with it. And so now they say, okay, natural immunity is a thing. And oh yeah, if you're a kid, you don't need the vaccine. Suspect. But that is what we've got for you tonight. Thank you so much for joining the show. It has been a pleasure. Be sure to join us tomorrow night. We have a great show for you. We're going to be talking to Dr. Judith Curry. She is a climate scientist, and she has been labeled a climate denier, climate change denier. She's been smeared very much, but she does believe in climate change. She does think that people have a large amount of contribution to climate change, but she just has a very different view on how it should be handled and whether or not it's a emergency, existential disaster. She has a very different view on that. So it'll be interesting to have that conversation with her tomorrow. So be sure to join us then for that. Otherwise, join me on my locals community. That link is down below. That is how you can support this independent journalism effort here on the Kim Iversen Show. We greatly appreciate your support and your love over in the locals community. So hit that button and join there. Otherwise, guys, same time, same place. See you tomorrow. Good night.